primarily Fletcher Prouty, who's sitting here. Fletcher served in the military since World War II, and in the 1960s he was in the Pentagon as one of the chief focal officers working with the Joint Chiefs of Staff and a liaison with the CIA. He did provided a lot of the military hardware for CIA covert operations, black operations, and it was Mr. Prouty who came to me 2 years ago and told me his story of the Pentagon and Kennedy from 1961 to 1963, and his own shock and belief at what happened, at the events that happened in those years. I subsequently used some of the information given to me by John Newman based on his historical research into that period and information you will see in his book, JFK in Vietnam. So X is primarily Fletcher with an additional piece of information and substantiation given by John. X never met with Jim Garrison. He met with me. But I took the liberty of having the meeting occur between Mr. Garrison and X because Jim Garrison reached essentially the same conclusions in 1968 and 9 and wrote about them in his first book, Heritage of Stone. Mr. Garrison's conclusions were that the possible motive for Kennedy's slaying was the winding down of the Cold War. And for that reason, I think some people have misunderstood and claimed that X never existed and that I made him up. I never did. All this information comes from Fletcher Prouty and John Newman.
This questioner says, please speak to the credibility of Mr. Prouty.
I'm sorry, what is the question?
Please speak to the credibility of Mr. Prouty.
I think Mr. Prouty has served his country and retired as a full colonel. He's written a book called The Secret Team, which is available for you to read. He has been critical of the CIA's illegitimate activities in the 50s and the 60s. He knows a lot about it. He briefed people like Alan Dulles, knew them, knew Richard Bissell, Charles Cabell, knew the atmosphere in the Pentagon at the time, knew Ed Lansdale. He retired in 1964, I believe, from the Pentagon and became a banker, studied banking, international banking, and the mechanics of where the money goes, because as you know, the CIA has quite a bit of it, and is now in retirement in Virginia, and I would urge you to question him yourselves. He's available after this press conference to talk with you and ask him as many questions as you want. His activities in later years are his business as far as I'm concerned. I am concerned with the 1960 period and the 1950 period.
Why would sophisticated assassins allow Abraham Zapruder to film the shooting at that vantage point?
Well, I think there were other films taken. It wasn't just Zapruder. There was a film taken by Nix, and there was a film taken by the Babushka lady that has, since we have a picture of a woman photographed in the assassination. She was at a very crucial point, too. So there were 3 or 4 people that were shooting films as well as still photographs. It wasn't in the assassin's interest to take a machine gun and assassinate everyone on the knoll. And if you stand behind the fence, you are blocked. Zapruder could not see you. It's a very there's some shrubbery there that blocked Zapruder's view of the fence shooter. In fact, when Zapruder panned around, and you can see it on the end of the Zapruder film, it is very difficult to see what's behind the fence, and no one has been able to. So I think they would have called a lot more attention to themselves by removing somebody like Zapruder, who came, by the way, probably at the last minute, as did a lot of these people.
Although the Zapruder film clearly makes the case for Kennedy being shot from the front, researcher David Lifton has suggested alterations were made in the film during its 3-day possession by the CIA. to cover up other clues in the film. Did you or your cinematographer detect any tampering in your copy of the film?
I'm going to pass this on to my researcher, and maybe we should move on to the next question, and then, because I don't know about this issue about tampering with the film.
Why would the Warren Commission, composed of both supporters and opponents of Kennedy, be united in a cover-up?
Well, one must not forget the history that the Warren Commission was divided. That I believe it was Boggs, Cooper, and Russell. Is that correct? Boggs, Cooper, and Russell wanted to have a dissenting report filed, and it was promised to them, and it was never filed. And several of those people did not go along with the magic bullet theory. In fact, the people who looked at the Zapruder film in that room with Arlen Specter, we have a report document that says that Specter was the only one in the room that came up with this magic bullet idea. None of the other people in that room believed it. So somehow that became the final word. I think that Hale Boggs in later years expressed many reservations. And I think that with the Warren Commission, it's a very interesting story and one that we didn't go into in depth, but I do think that there was a significant amount of pressure from Lyndon Johnson to move on with this story, not to get bogged down in the possibility of a conspiracy theory that pointed he implied to Castro, and which would require, obviously, a war with Cuba. So I think that the Warren Commission is shown in the film acting in a way as if to reassure the American public that one assassin did it and not to really examine the evidence. I think that most of the Warren Commission, the 26 volumes that Mr. Garrison read, said that most of the witnesses in it are irrelevant. They have no information. And it just seems like a lot of it is stuffing. I don't think Mr. Warren wanted the job, and we have clear documentation that Mr. Johnson persuaded him strongly to take it. And obviously, as you know, the Warren Commission did not have key information, was not given to it by either the FBI or the CIA. They gave what they wanted to the Warren Commission. And Mr. Dulles, being on the Warren Commission, obviously knew, among other things, of the plots against Castro, and never mentioned to any of his confreres, as far as we know, the possibility that our own intelligence agency was involved in an assassination of a foreign leader, which obviously would have heavily influenced the thinking of the Warren Commission in another direction. If you can destabilize a foreign country, then why the hell can't you destabilize your own country?
Do you think the opening of the files will really prove anything? Won't all the material be missing?
In answer to the previous question on Lifton, a few frames are missing from the film because of a, quote, handling mishap, unquote. But the central point is that the shot is from the front that we make in the movie. So if they were going to tamper with the film, why wouldn't they tamper with that? As it stands, the film is very damaging. And I think the tampering question is less important. I think that the files at the House Select Assassinations Committee are fascinating. There's a number of people that have been interviewed, and if there are no exemptions made and we can see those files, I think it will be. We have some of the 201 file on Oswald. Some of it's still with the CIA. We have Santos Traficante, Richard Case Nagel, William Sullivan, number 3 man in the FBI. He was a director, I believe, of covert operations in '63. Sullivan was interviewed before his suicide. He was killed in a hunting accident. Somebody thought he was a deer and shot him on his front lawn. Johnny Roselli and Sam Giancana obviously did not get to testify. We have Atlee Phillips, the CIA man. We have Delphine Roberts, who was the secretary to Guy Bannister, Marina Oswald, Wally Weston, impresario, comic in the Jack Ruby Carousel Club. George de Mohrenschildt is there. Dean Andrews, who was played by John Candy in the film, is in that file. William Walter, the FBI guy who found the telex, the Dallas doctors, the Bethesda doctors. We have the 43 hours of Cuban exiles. We have Frank Sturgis. We have Joe Milletier. The JFK hearings, like whatever that means, they say JFK hearings, 47 hours. This is stuff that's classified, that's still under file. We would like to see it. Even if this comes out, there is still the issue of what the CIA has, and no one really knows what they have. I think Jim Lazar and Gus Russo of the National Archives, under the Freedom of Information Act, have found out that they could not get any of the files because the CIA said, we have 300,000 pages, we can't Xerox it and give it to you. So that's all we know, is that there's 300,000 pages at one point was with the CIA. Mr. Tannenbaum was the counsel to the committee. The House committee said that there are 850 boxes and a bunch of film and audio. Beyond that, beyond the CIA, and very few people ever point to it, is that the military intelligence files have never come to the surface. The Army Intelligence Group claimed in 1973 that those files were, quote, routinely destroyed, although we know that Harvey Lee Oswald was on a file. I suggest that they unroutinely find them. ONI, Office of Naval Intelligence, those files, we don't know where they are. We have a strong belief that Oswald was involved with ONI. FBI files on Guy Bannister. The moment Guy Bannister died in New Orleans, the FBI came and took his files. Where are they? So it is filtered all over this government. And obviously, this is where the people play a role, and if democracy works, then the president, whoever he be, should be responsive to the desire of the American people to be at one with their own history. But as Norman Mailer said very wittily in his Vanity Fair speech, he thinks that even if we could get into some of these files, it's a bit like leaving a Mercedes in the South Bronx for 20 years. You know, what's left? John has written me a note here that there are still some Vietnam files that are classified and extremely important.
What is your reaction today to reports today that reputed mobster Carlos Marcello and other alleged mafia members aligned with Jimmy Hoffa in the assassination?
I tried to talk to Carlos in New Orleans. I got as far as his brother, who denied everything. I would love to talk to Carlos. He's 94 years old, and maybe somebody in our government or one of you journalists could go and talk to him. However, I stand by what the film says about the mafia, that we certainly know now that the mafia worked with the CIA and was used by the CIA. We have documents that show the CIA used crime elements in various countries to do some of its work. They work hand in hand, as discussed in several scenes in the movie. But Mr. Garrison in the film says it is just inconceivable to him that the mafia would have the organizational ability to bring an Oswald in and out of Russia, to get him a job in a book depository, to design the parade route or motorcade in such a way that it would bring Mr. Kennedy beneath the building in such a way. And beyond that, how would the mob cover up the autopsy and appoint the Warren Commission?
Your depiction of Garrison as Robin Hood is grossly distorted. Clay Shaw was acquitted in less than an hour, a fact you conveniently ignore. Garrison was using Shaw as a clay pigeon. He wanted to be governor and was using Shaw to gain fame. Please comment.
Why anyone would, in 1967, seek to be a governor of a state by going against the CIA and the entire government, suggesting they killed its president, is beyond me. Your political life, Jim's political life was over the moment he brought those charges. Obviously, he was taking on the establishment in a major way, and he paid a heavy price for it. As to the case itself, I just would want to remind you that he has been vilified and trashed over and over and over again in the press. He has now become a non-person in a sense that Stalin's opponents, Bukharov and Trotsky, became non-persons. There are no specifics that are ever brought up. It's been a media mantra, a buzzword, a coda, a credo. The journalists cite each other to substitute for critical analysis. Jim had an interesting history. He was an FBI man. He was a war hero. He was elected 3 times DA of New Orleans. Why? Not by the